The rain fell furiously over the streets of Los Angeles, turning the sidewalks into a shimmering mosaic of puddles. Cars rushed by, splashing water on the few pedestrians braving the night. Jamie, just 13 years old, sat huddled in a corner of an alley, leaning against the cold wall. His oversized, worn-out jacket barely provided any warmth. He clutched a small bag containing leftover sandwich scraps someone had given him earlier. Jamie was used to being invisible. People rarely looked at him. Even when they responded to his pleas for help, they did so quickly, without making eye contact. It was easier for them that way. Suddenly, something caught his attention. A sleek, black luxury car pulled up nearby, its surface gleaming even in the relentless rain. The doors opened, revealing a strikingly elegant couple. The man, tall and confident, looked familiar. His tailored suit seemed impervious to the wet night. Beside him, a stunning woman adjusted her designer handbag. Her golden hair was perfectly styled, and her black dress looked more expensive than anything Jamie could imagine. Jamie recognized the man, Elon Musk. Though he didn't know much about him, he'd seen the face on billboards and TV. A pang of curiosity struck him. People like Elon Musk didn't usually stop in neighborhoods like this. As the couple headed toward a nearby restaurant, Jamie noticed the woman drop a small vial from her bag. The faint sound of glass hitting the pavement was muffled by the rain, but Jamie's sharp eyes caught it. He quickly got up and snatched the item before it could be swept away by the running water. It was a small, translucent vial with a label that made Jamie's eyes widen. Toxic, controlled use. He turned the vial in his fingers, intrigued. The word toxic gleamed under the streetlight. Before he could process what it meant, the woman turned sharply. Her eyes locked onto Jamie's, and for a moment, he felt frozen in place. Her gaze was piercing, cold as the night wind. "That's mine," she said, extending her hand in a tone that allowed no argument. Jamie hesitated, but the sharpness in her voice compelled him to return the vial. She snatched it back, stashing it in her bag with a curt gesture. "Stay away from things that don't belong to you, boy," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Elon glanced briefly at Jamie, but was quickly pulled away by the woman as they entered the restaurant without another word. Jamie stood there, his heart racing. Something about the woman's behavior, the way she grabbed the vial, the tone in her voice, left him uneasy. What was that liquid? And why did it seem so important to her? As the couple's footsteps faded, Jamie felt a deep sense of curiosity stir within him. Secrets were the only currency he had on the streets, and he felt this one might be worth uncovering. The mansion was imposing, a modern castle hidden behind tall, ivy-covered walls. Jamie stared at the building from the top of a nearby tree, which he had climbed with considerable effort. The property, illuminated against the night's darkness, seemed like a fortress, its large windows revealing glimpses of a life of unimaginable luxury. After tailing Elon and Vivian's car through the city, sneaking through shadowed streets and keeping a safe distance, Jamie had arrived. The night's chill, amplified by the rain, seemed to vanish as he fixated on the figures inside the house. Elon and Vivian were in what appeared to be a dining room. Jamie squinted, adjusting to the light spilling through the enormous glass windows. Inside, a long table was being meticulously prepared by two uniformed staff. Polished silver candlesticks gleamed under an opulent chandelier, and fine china was aligned with precision. It looked like a scene from a movie. Then he saw Vivian. She walked into the room holding a bowl, her expression sending a shiver down Jamie's spine. It wasn't just the usual coldness he had noticed earlier. There was something more, something calculated. Jamie watched as she retrieved the small vial, the very one he had held hours ago, and poured its contents into the steaming soup. Jamie leaned forward, nearly losing his balance. He couldn't tear his eyes away as Vivian stirred the liquid into the broth, her movements deliberate. Her lips were pressed into a tight line, and her posture was tense, as though she was about to commit an irreversible act. This can't be good, Jamie muttered to himself, dread creeping into his chest. Before he could think about what to do, Elon entered the room. His energy contrasted sharply with Vivian's stiffness. He seemed animated, gesturing enthusiastically as he approached. Jamie couldn't hear the conversation, but it was clear that Elon trusted her completely. He kissed her forehead, and Vivian responded with a forced smile. Jamie felt a knot forming in his stomach. Everything about this felt wrong. Jamie watched as Elon sat down at the table. One of the staff placed a bowl of soup in front of him, and Vivian sat nearby, her eyes fixed on him with a chilling calmness. "He's going to eat it," Jamie whispered, gripping the tree branch tightly. The billionaire was about to bring the spoon to his lips, and Jamie knew that if he didn't act, he might be witnessing a murder. Rain dripped down Jamie's face as he took a deep breath, trying to decide his next move. There was no time to lose, but what could a street kid like him do against someone like Vivian? Jamie's heart pounded as he climbed down the tree and bolted toward the mansion. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he had to act before it was too late. The mansion's glowing windows stood like beacons in the dark, guiding him as he scaled the gate with surprising agility for someone so small. When his feet hit the ground on the other side, he broke into a run. The rain-slick pavement almost made him slip, but Jamie didn't stop. He had to warn Elon before the soup was eaten. Reaching the large glass door to the dining room, he saw the scene again, Elon holding the spoonful of soup, ready to taste it. Jamie didn't hesitate. With all the strength he could muster, he banged on the door, forcing it open with a loud crash. "Don't eat that. It's poisoned," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. The impact of the moment was immediate. Elon froze, the spoon hovering in midair, staring at Jamie in pure shock. Vivian stood abruptly, her expression shifting from surprise to something colder, more dangerous. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" Elon demanded, his voice deep but tinged with confusion. Before Jamie could answer, Vivian pointed at him with an air of indignation. "He's an intruder, a street kid. He must be here to steal or beg for money. Call security, Elon." "No, that's not it," Jamie shouted, breathless. He pointed at the soup. "I saw her put poison in there. I was outside and saw everything." The tension in the room was almost palpable. Elon looked at Vivian, then at Jamie, then back at the soup in front of him. Finally, he set the spoon down and stood, rubbing his forehead as he tried to make sense of the situation. "Vivian," he seemed so certain. "Is there any explanation for this?" Elon asked, his voice trembling slightly. She glared at him, a glint of defiance in her eyes. "You're seriously considering the word of a dirty stranger who just broke into our house? He might have been the one who poisoned it while we weren't looking." Jamie stepped forward, pleading, "Please, sir. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw her pour something into the soup. I swear I'm telling the truth." The room hung in suspense. Elon glanced at Vivian again, then at Jamie, before turning his gaze back to the bowl of soup. Finally, he sighed and motioned to one of the staff. "Take this away. I want it tested." Vivian's eyes narrowed, but she maintained her composure. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe," Elon said, holding her gaze a moment longer than she seemed comfortable with. "But it's a risk I'm not willing to take." Jamie felt himself being dragged out of the mansion by two security guards, despite his protests. Before being thrown into the wet sidewalk, he shouted one last time, "Test the soup. You'll see she's lying." Outside, Jamie sat on the rain-soaked ground, coughing as droplets ran down his face. He had done all he could. Now, all he could do was hope that Elon would uncover the truth before it was too late. The next morning dawned under a heavy gray sky, the kind of day that seemed to carry the echoes of the previous night. Elon Musk sat in his expansive office, an impressive space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Los Angeles hills. But the view held no interest for him. His eyes were fixed on a sealed envelope lying on his desk. delivered by a trusted laboratory he had hired to analyze the soup. Elon reached for the envelope, hesitating briefly before breaking the seal. His breath slowed, though it remained heavy as he read the words that confirmed his worst fears. Presence of toxic substances detected, potentially lethal. He closed his eyes, a chill running down his spine. The confirmation hit him like a blow, but the shock quickly gave way to a swirl of emotions: disbelief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He set the report aside and glanced at a framed photograph on his desk, an image of himself and Vivian taken at a charity gala early in their marriage. Her smile in the picture looked so genuine, so real. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Thomas, his head of security. "Mr. Musk, we need to talk about the intruder from last night. Apparently, he's still in the city." "You mean the boy?" Elon asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, sir. He was found near the subway station downtown. He doesn't appear to be dangerous, but he keeps insisting he was only trying to save you. What should we do with him?" Elon paused for a moment before answering. "Bring him to me now." Jamie sat on a bench at the city center, chewing on a piece of bread he'd gotten from a convenience store. His thoughts were a whirlwind. He didn't know if Elon had believed him, if the billionaire had actually tested the soup, or if everything had been dismissed as the ramblings of a street kid. He barely noticed when two men approached him. "Jamie," one of them asked, his tone calm but firm. "Who wants to know?" Jamie replied, standing defensively. "Mr. Musk would like to speak with you. Come with us." For a moment, Jamie considered running, but the man's tone wasn't threatening, and something told him that maybe, just maybe, he had planted a seed of doubt in Elon's mind. He nodded and followed the men. Back at the mansion, Elon waited in a smaller room, far from the opulence of the dining hall. When Jamie was brought in, Elon motioned for the security guards to leave, leaving the two alone. Jamie entered with his shoulders tense, but his eyes held no fear. He stared directly at Elon. "You saw it, didn't you? I was right, wasn't I?" Elon sighed, crossing his arms. The soup was poisoned. Jamie let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by worry. "You believed me. So why is she still here? Why isn't she in jail?" Elon rubbed his temples. "Because it's not that simple. Accusing my wife of trying to kill me, that's not something I can resolve with a lab report. I need more evidence, something indisputable." "Evidence?" Jamie said incredulously. "I saw her do it. What more do you need?" "Context," Elon replied, his voice filled with frustration. "Motive. Something that tells me why she would do this. And more importantly, who she's working with, because I don't believe she's acting alone." Jamie thought for a moment, then recalled something he'd overheard the previous night. "I do know something," he said. "While I was outside before I ran into the house, I heard her talking on the phone. She said something like, 'The day after tomorrow, everything will be ours. He won't survive.'" The words landed like stones in Elon's gut. He remained silent, his jaw tightening as he processed the information. Finally, he looked at Jamie, his eyes filled with what seemed to be respect. "You risked a lot to save me, kid," he said. "Why?" Jamie shrugged, looking away. "Because it was the right thing to do. I've already lost people before. I couldn't let it happen again. Not if I could stop it." Elon frowned. "Lost people?" Jamie hesitated, then took a deep breath. "My parents. They died because... I don't know, because of people like her. People who only care about themselves." Elon was silent, taking in the boy's words. He had never met someone so young yet so scarred by life. "All right," Elon said finally. "Whatever her plan is, I'm going to find out. And you're going to help me." Jamie's eyes widened. "Me? How?" "Oh." Elon smiled grimly. "You have a knack for noticing things other people don't. And I think you can help me uncover the truth." That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Elon and Jamie sat side by side, piecing together the puzzle. Vivian and her accomplice were plotting something. That much was clear. But what else were they hiding? And what did the day after tomorrow mean? There were too many questions and not enough time. The mansion was quieter than usual that night. Elon walked alone in his study, deep in thought. The confirmation of the poison, Jamie's warning, and the strange phrase, the day after tomorrow, weighed heavily on his mind. He knew he was dealing with something far more significant than simple betrayal. It was time to search for answers in the one place he never thought he'd have to revisit, Vivian's past. Downstairs, Jamie waited, sitting on the edge of a chair and nibbling on the corner of a piece of bread. He wasn't sure why Elon had asked him to stay, but he had the feeling that something big was about to happen. "Jamie," Elon said, entering the room with a tablet in hand, "I need you to hear this. Maybe it will help me make sense of it." Jamie looked at him puzzled. "Hear what?" "I looked into Vivian before we got married, but it was superficial. A mistake on my part. I trusted the bond we had from childhood. But now, after everything that's happened, I realize she might not be who I thought she was." Jamie leaned forward, intrigued. Elon pulled out a chair and sat across from the boy. "Vivian grew up in the same town as me. We were childhood friends. After my family moved, I never heard from her again. Years later, she reappeared, saying life had been hard. She said she needed help, that the world had been unfair to her. So I took her in, first as a friend, then as my wife." Jamie frowned. "But you didn't check anything about her." "I did the basics," Elon admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "She didn't seem to have anything to hide. She was charming, intelligent, and reminded me of a time when I was still a nobody. I thought I could trust her." Jamie shook his head, incredulous. "And now," Elon swiped through the tablet screen, "I hired an investigator to dig deeper. And what he found is disturbing." The next few hours were a deep dive into secrets Elon never expected to uncover. Vivian had a past that seemed deliberately concealed, as if she had erased her tracks. Among the discoveries, two things stood out. First, Vivian had been married before, twice, in fact. Both unions ended tragically, with her husbands dying under suspicious circumstances. In both cases, Vivian inherited considerable fortunes. Second, a name surfaced that Elon hadn't heard in years: Greg Marshall. Greg had been an employee at one of Elon's companies, fired after a financial embezzlement scandal. The dossier suggested that Vivian and Greg were connected, but the details were vague. "Greg," Elon murmured, staring at the name on the screen. He remembered the man, charismatic, ambitious, but morally questionable. When the fraud came to light, Elon had dismissed him without hesitation. Greg had vowed revenge, but Elon hadn't taken the threat seriously at the time. "Who's Greg?" Jamie asked, leaning over to look at the tablet. "Someone I should have removed from the equation years ago," Elon replied, his expression hardening. "He stole millions from my company and shattered the trust of many people. Now, it seems he's found another way to try to get back at me." Jamie remained silent for a moment, processing. "Do you think he and Vivian?" Elon nodded slowly. "It's possible. Maybe he manipulated her resentment against me. Or maybe the two of them crossed paths and decided I was a common target. It doesn't matter. I'll find out the truth." Later that night, Elon walked down to the kitchen, where he found Jamie fiddling with a piece of bread, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" Elon asked, pouring himself a glass of water. Jamie looked up at him, his eyes reflecting something Elon couldn't quite place. "I lost my parents because they trusted the wrong people," Jamie said finally. "They were tricked by someone who said they were a friend. When everything fell apart, I was left alone." Elon paused, observing the boy. "You never told me that?" Jamie shrugged. "You never asked. But I think that's why I knew she wasn't trustworthy. People like her, I can spot them from a mile away." Elon stood in silence for a moment before placing a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "I won't let this happen again, Jamie. Not to me, and not to you." As the clock struck midnight, Elon and Jamie sat side by side, connecting the pieces of the puzzle. Vivian and Greg were clearly conspiring. This much was certain. But what more were they hiding? And what did the day after tomorrow truly mean? Questions loomed, and time was running out. The mansion hummed with a deceptive tranquility that evening. Elon hadn't mentioned anything to Vivian about what he had discovered. He knew he had to wait for the right moment to act. So, when she suggested an intimate dinner for the two of them, he accepted, even though every fiber of his being screamed not to trust her. Vivian was dazzling in a red dress that seemed tailor-made for the occasion. The dining table was decorated with fresh flowers, aromatic candles, and 2 glasses of wine placed prominently in the center. She smiled warmly at Elon when he entered, but something in her gaze felt sharp, calculated. "I thought we needed some time together," she said, pouring wine into the glasses. "You work so hard, Elon. Sometimes, I feel like you forget to take care of yourself." Elon returned her smile, keeping his expression neutral, while every nerve in his body remained on high alert. He noticed when Vivian, with a practiced hand, picked up a small vial and discreetly let a few drops fall into the wine she placed in front of him. It was quick, almost imperceptible. Almost. Vivian turned back to him, her expression flawless. "There, our little escape from the chaos." "It looks perfect," Elon replied, taking his seat. He knew he couldn't simply refuse to drink. It would raise suspicion and jeopardize the plan he and Jamie had devised. Outside, Jamie crouched near a kitchen window, holding a small recording device and a cheap camera they had bought that morning. He had sneaked back into the mansion, this time with Elon's approval. His job was clear: to observe and record any suspicious moves Vivian made. The muffled sound of Vivian's voice reached him. "Everything will work out, Greg," she said urgently over the phone. "If it doesn't happen tonight, we'll try again. He can't survive another week." Jamie pressed the record button, every muscle in his body tense. He knew he had to move quickly and carefully. In the dining room, Elon raised his glass, watching Vivian through the reflection in the wine. "To you, my love," he said, feigning nonchalance. Vivian smiled, lifting her glass. "And to us." Always. Just as their glasses were about to meet, Elon's smartwatch beeped. He feigned surprise. "Oh, sorry. It seems there's something urgent at the office. A Mars project issue." "Now?" Vivian asked, her tone a mix of irritation and surprise. "Unfortunately, yes." Elon stood, placing his glass back on the table. "I won't be long. We'll continue as soon as I return." Vivian watched him leave, her hand tightening around her fork. For a moment, her composed expression faltered, revealing a flicker of frustration. In the kitchen, Elon met Jamie, who was already showing him the recording with a triumphant glint in his eyes. "She said exactly what you thought," Jamie whispered, handing him the device. "She's planning something with Greg." Elon pressed play and listened to Vivian's words. When the phrase, "he can't survive another week," echoed through the kitchen, he closed his eyes, struggling to maintain his composure. "This is enough," Elon murmured. "Now we have concrete proof." "What do we do now?" Jamie asked, his voice tense. Elon looked at the boy, his expression resolute. "Now we dismantle it all. She won't get another chance." Later that night, Elon retreated to his study, where he had access to the network of hidden cameras he had installed throughout the mansion. He watched Vivian talking on the phone again, but this time she seemed more agitated. "Greg," he left in the middle of dinner. "Something's wrong. I don't trust him." "Stay calm," Greg's gravelly voice replied on the other end. "If he's on to us, we'll deal with it another way. Just keep your cool until I get there." Elon turned off the screen, his fingers drumming on the wooden desk. He needed a strategy that would end this conspiracy once and for all. Tension hung thick in the air. Vivian clearly suspected that something was amiss, but Elon and Jamie were now one step ahead. The final showdown against her deadly scheme was imminent. The following morning, Elon left the mansion discreetly in one of his less conspicuous cars. Before departing, he looked at Jamie, who was perched on the edge of a guest room bed. "You know what to do," Elon said, handing him a small device with a screen. "This is the camera monitor. Watch everything that happens while I'm gone. If anything seems strange, let me know immediately." Jamie nodded, clutching the monitor to his chest. "You think she'll try something while you're away?" "She will," Elon replied, his gaze steely. "Vivian isn't the type to wait patiently. This is her chance to act." With those words, Elon left, feigning a business trip. Inside the mansion, Vivian appeared restless. Throughout the day, she paced the living room, spending most of her time on the phone. Jamie, hidden in the security room Elon had set up, watched her every move through the cameras. Finally, in the early evening, Greg arrived. He entered through a side door, avoiding the staff or any prying neighbors. Dressed casually, he looked relaxed, but his expression betrayed a simmering intensity. Jamie adjusted the monitor's audio, tuning into their conversation. "He's gone?" Greg asked, throwing a backpack onto the couch. "Yes, he said he'll be away for a few days, but something feels off," Vivian replied, pouring a glass of whiskey for him. "He's been acting differently. And that boy, I still don't understand how he fits into this." Greg took a sip of his drink and sat down. "It doesn't matter. The plan goes on as discussed. We have little time before he returns." Jamie swallowed hard, listening intently. From across the city, Elon sat in a private office he rarely used. A laptop screen displayed the mansion's live camera feeds. Beside him, a private investigator he'd hired weeks ago watched in silence. "They're bold," the investigator said, shaking his head, discussing the details of their plan as if there's no chance of being caught. "That's typical Greg," Elon replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. "He's always been arrogant. Never believed I was smarter than him." Inside the mansion, Vivian and Greg sat at the dining table, reviewing the final details of their plan. "I still think we should have finished this during dinner yesterday," Greg said impatiently. "The longer we wait, the riskier it gets. And I've already told you it wasn't the right time," Vivian snapped, her tone sharp. "I know Elon. He's not as naive as you think." Greg smirked sarcastically. "You seem pretty worried for someone who claimed to know how to handle him." Vivian glared at him, her voice cutting. "I spent years by his side. I made sacrifices you can't even imagine. If we're this close now, it's because I played the game perfectly. Don't ruin everything with your impatience." Jamie hit the record button again, capturing every word. He knew it was only a matter of time before they revealed something that would incriminate them both definitively. As the night deepened, Vivian revealed something that made Elon, watching from his remote office, widen his eyes. "Do you know what he did to me when we were young?" she said, her voice trembling with rage. "He left me behind as if I were nothing. And when I reappeared, he thought he could buy me with his ridiculous compassion. I never forgot. And now he'll pay." Greg shrugged. "And I'll make sure he pays for ruining my life. He thinks he's an untouchable genius, but everyone has a weakness." Vivian laughed, raising her glass. "And his weakness is me." Elon turned off the feed, leaning back in his chair. He had heard enough. "This is more than I expected," he said to the investigator. "With this recording, I have enough to take them down. Should I notify the police now?" the man asked. "Not yet," Elon replied, his expression hardening. "I want to confront them first. I want them to know exactly what they've lost." The mansion's lights gleamed against the night sky as Jamie watched the cameras one last time, knowing that the final confrontation was imminent. The mansion lay shrouded in a tense quietness, as if the walls themselves could sense the storm brewing within. Elon remained stoic, observing the live footage from the hidden cameras. Every word Vivian and Greg spoke confirmed the depth of their conspiracy. But Elon's discoveries about Vivian's past haunted him more than their present actions. In the study, Jamie watched as Elon scrolled through pages of information on his tablet, each new revelation adding weight to the atmosphere. Jamie hesitated, then finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "You really love her, didn't you?" Elon paused, his fingers resting on the edge of the tablet. He adjusted his cufflinks, staring at the wall as though searching for an answer. "Yes, I did. At least I loved the person I thought she was." The silence between them grew heavy before Elon finally spoke again. "But what hurts the most isn't the betrayal. It's realizing that she used something real, something meaningful, to justify all this. She destroyed every good memory I had of her." Jamie nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I know what it feels like to trust someone and realize you were just a piece in their game." Elon raised an eyebrow, silently urging the boy to elaborate. Jamie hesitated before taking a deep breath. "My parents, they died because they trusted the wrong person. A neighbor said he'd handle their finances while they were away. He took everything, left them drowning in debt. When they came back, it was too late to fix things." Elon studied the boy, impressed by the quiet strength in his words. He placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "You're strong, Jamie. Stronger than I was at your age." Meanwhile, Elon's investigator continued digging into Vivian's past, uncovering even more troubling details. 2 former husbands, both dead under suspicious circumstances. Michael Foster, a tech entrepreneur, had died of heart failure shortly after revising his will to leave half his fortune to Vivian. Andrew Calhoun, a respected doctor, had perished in a car accident after a brake failure, ruled a tragic mishap at the time. In both cases, Vivian inherited significant wealth. "She's a predator," the investigator told Elon during a call. "And Greg seems to be just the latest tool in her arsenal." Elon clenched his jaw, his thoughts drifting to the day Vivian had re-entered his life. She had seemed like a reminder of his humble beginnings, a link to a simpler time. Her stories of hardship had touched him deeply, convincing him to open his home and his heart to her. That night, Jamie reviewed the security footage again and found a video he hadn't noticed before. It showed Vivian alone in a room, holding a framed photograph of herself and Elon. Her voice, though low, was filled with bitterness. "You left me behind, Elon," she murmured, her voice trembling with rage. "All these years and you never thought about me. Now, I'll make sure you remember." Jamie brought the footage to Elon, who watched in silence. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "She really believed I abandoned her," he muttered to himself. "But that doesn't justify this. It doesn't justify the lives she's ruined." Jamie nodded, his voice soft but resolute. "She convinced herself you were the enemy. Nothing you do will change that." Elon turned to Jamie, his expression firm. "Maybe not, but I can make sure she never does this to anyone else again." As the clock struck midnight, Elon and Jamie worked through the final details of their plan. Vivian and Greg's plot was becoming clearer, but the day after tomorrow still loomed ominously. Time was running out. The next evening, the mansion was buzzing with quiet preparations. Elon had orchestrated the ultimate test, a final dinner with Vivian, one that would reveal her true intentions. Jamie paced nervously in a hidden corner of the house, holding the monitoring device tightly. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked Elon, who was reviewing the camera feeds one last time. "It will," Elon replied, his voice steady. "She won't resist the opportunity to act. And when she does, we'll have everything we need." Jamie nodded, though his face betrayed his lingering worry. At precisely 8 o'clock, Vivian entered the dining hall, her appearance immaculate as always. She wore a sleek black dress that seemed to radiate confidence, and her smile was as disarming as ever. The table was set with candles, fine china, and 2 glasses of wine awaiting their toast. "You've been so mysterious today," Vivian said, taking her seat. "What are we celebrating?" "Sometimes it's nice to just enjoy each other's company," Elon replied, pouring the wine. His expression remained neutral, but inside, every nerve was taut. Vivian studied him carefully as he made small talk, trying not to appear impatient. Finally, Elon raised his glass, his tone casual but tinged with provocation. "What would you do if you inherited everything I have?" he asked. Her smile faltered just for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "What kind of question is that?" "Just curious," Elon said, leaning forward slightly. "You're so talented, so charming. I'm sure you'd know exactly what to do with it all." Vivian let out a nervous laugh. "Elon, sometimes you say the strangest things. Let's toast, shall we?" Before their glasses could meet, a sudden noise came from the front of the mansion. It was Greg, storming in with a look of irritation and urgency. "I told you to wait," Vivian hissed, standing to intercept him. "I don't trust him," Greg replied, ignoring her attempts to calm him. "I think he knows more than he's letting on." Elon remained seated, watching the two with calm detachment. He lifted his wine glass, swirling it gently, but never drinking. "Greg, what a pleasant surprise. Joining us for dinner?" Greg forced a tight smile. "You're a hard man to impress, Musk. Seems like nothing escapes your radar." "That's true," Elon said, rising slowly from his chair. "Which is why I'm curious about what you and my wife have been discussing lately. Seems you've got some interesting plans for me." Vivian froze, her face hardening. "Elon, what are you insinuating?" "Me?" Elon feigned innocence. "Nothing too serious. Just wondering why the wine you poured me happens to contain poison." A tense silence fell over the room. Greg glared at Vivian, whose composed exterior finally cracked, revealing panic beneath. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You've lost your mind, Elon. Why would I do something so insane?" Elon laughed coldly. "Good question. Maybe because you think I'm an idiot, or because you believe that if I die, everything will be yours." He paused, turning his gaze to Greg. "Or maybe because you thought Greg here would help you cover your tracks." Greg stepped forward, his tone attempting calm. "You don't have proof. You're grasping at straws, Musk." Elon gestured, and Jamie entered the room, holding a monitor connected to the mansion's cameras. "Actually, I do. Everything you've said over the last few days is here, recorded, documented. And now, with the police..." As the sound of sirens grew louder outside, Vivian turned on Greg, her voice sharp with desperation. "You were supposed to wait. We had a plan." Greg sneered. "Your plan was falling apart. I had to step in before you ruined it completely." "Ruined it?" Vivian's voice cracked, tears of rage and frustration welling in her eyes. "You think this is my fault? I did everything for us." Greg laughed bitterly. "For us? Don't kid yourself, Vivian. You did this for you. I was just along for the ride." At that moment, police officers entered the room. Greg tried to bolt, but two officers tackled him to the ground. Vivian stood frozen, her body trembling as the reality of her failure sank in. Elon stepped closer to her, his expression a mix of sadness and resolution. "Why, Vivian? I gave you everything. My trust, my love. And this is how you repay me." She finally broke. "Because you've always been selfish, Elon," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You saw the world as a chessboard and people as disposable pieces. You left me behind when we were young, and now you'll understand what it feels like to be left behind." Greg tried to escape, but was intercepted by the police as they entered through the front door. Vivian collapsed into a chair, too drained to fight. Elon looked at them both with a mix of sadness and resolve. "You can blame me for whatever you want, but the truth is you destroyed yourselves." The dining hall of the mansion was now a crime scene. Police officers moved in and out, collecting evidence and questioning Vivian and Greg, who had been separated and were seated on opposite sides of the room. Jamie stood off to the side, holding the monitor that had become a crucial piece of evidence. Though small in stature compared to the grand space, his eyes stayed focused on Elon. anticipating his next move. Vivian, her hands trembling, looked at Elon as two officers questioned her. Her once perfect demeanor was unraveling, and the cracks were showing in her voice and expression. Finally, the weight of it all overwhelmed her. "Everything I did was for revenge," she shouted, tears streaking her face. "He's always placed himself above everyone else, always acted like he was better than us." Elon, leaning casually against the table, crossed his arms and stared at her. "You think that justifies trying to kill me? Stealing my life? You never look back, Elon." Vivian spat, her voice raw with anger. "You knew what I was going through. You knew I had nothing, but you just kept living your glorious life while I struggled to survive." Elon frowned, confusion etched into his features. "I knew? How could I have known? You never told me anything. You came back into my life with a story, and I believed you. I trusted you. I loved you." Vivian's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Trusted me? You used me, Elon, like you use everyone else. To polish your image, to pretend you're human. But deep down, you never cared about anyone but yourself." Elon shook his head, disbelief washing over him. "That's your justification? That's the foundation for all of this." On the other side of the room, Greg, who had been sitting silently, let out a low chuckle. "Give it a rest, Vivian. He'll never understand. People like Elon never do." Elon turned to him, his gaze sharpening. "And what's your excuse, Greg? You had opportunities. You had a promising career. All you had to do was keep your integrity." Greg smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Integrity? You really don't get it, do you? I worked hard. I did everything I could to get noticed, but you only ever saw numbers, Musk. I was just another cog in your machine. When you fired me, you didn't just take away my job. You took my life." Elon took a step forward, his voice firm. "You embezzled from my company, Greg. And now you want to play the victim? You destroyed your own life, and now you tried to destroy mine." Greg hesitated, his bravado faltering for a moment before his anger returned. "Maybe I lost my integrity, but at least I don't spend my life pretending to be a saint." Vivian, listening to this, turned to Greg, disbelief twisting her features. "A saint? You only cared about the money I promised you. You didn't care about what I felt, only your pathetic little revenge." Greg glared at her, laughing cruelly. "And you actually thought I loved you? Wake up, Vivian. You're as disposable to me as anyone else." The words struck Vivian like a physical blow. She froze, the betrayal washing over her before her knees buckled, and she collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Jamie, standing at a distance, looked away, unable to bear the scene. Elon remained unmoved, his gaze cold as he watched Vivian unravel. The woman he had thought he loved was now a shadow of herself, her layers of lies stripped away. "I gave you everything, Vivian," Elon said finally, his voice heavy with sadness. "I took you in. I trusted you. And now, all I see in you is hatred and regret for what you couldn't have." Vivian looked up at him, her words barely audible. "I just wanted you to pay for what you did to me." Elon shook his head, his expression bitter. "I already have. Not with money, but with the pain of realizing I never really knew you at all." As the police began to take Vivian and Greg into custody, Greg tried to make a break for it, but was quickly restrained. Before being escorted out, he turned to Elon with a mocking grin. "You can lock me up, Musk, but people like you always end up alone. You destroy everything around you, and in the end, you'll have no one." Elon didn't respond, his attention shifting back to Vivian. She glanced at him one last time, her eyes hollow, before the officers led her away. The interrogation rooms at the Los Angeles police station were stark and cold, their walls painted a dull gray that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. Vivian and Greg sat in separate rooms, each confronted by a detective. The silence between questions was deafening, especially for Vivian, who looked hollowed out, her composure shattered. Greg, on the other hand, wore a mask of defiance, though his eyes betrayed his unease. Later that evening, Elon and Jamie arrived at the station, accompanied by Elon's lawyer. In the corridor outside the interrogation rooms, Jamie hesitated. His foot tapped nervously against the linoleum floor, and his hands fidgeted with the hem of his oversized jacket. "You don't have to go in there," Elon said, noticing the boy's tension. "I do," Jamie said, his voice resolute. "She needs to know she can't just get away with this. She needs to understand she can't keep hurting people." In the interrogation room, Vivian sat with her hands cuffed in front of her, her gaze fixed on the table. When Elon entered, followed by Jamie, she glanced up, and for a fleeting moment, something like shame flickered across her face. "Elon," she began, her voice trembling, but he raised a hand, silencing her. "I didn't come here for excuses," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I came here to make something clear. You destroyed everything we had, every ounce of trust, every good memory. But what you'll never destroy is who I am. And more importantly, you'll never get another chance to hurt anyone else." Vivian's lips quivered as she looked at him. But before she could speak, Jamie stepped forward. "You knew he trusted you," Jamie said, his voice steady and stronger than expected. "He believed in you even when he shouldn't have. And you used that against him." Vivian's gaze shifted to Jamie, surprised by the intensity in the boy's voice. "You think the world made you suffer?" Jamie continued. "You think that gives you the right to ruin other people's lives? My parents trusted someone like you, and now they're gone. People like you destroy everything." His words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Vivian looked away, her face pale and expression unreadable. In the adjacent room, Greg sat slumped in his chair, his defiant mask finally cracking under the weight of the evidence. The detectives played portions of the recordings Jamie had made, their words damning and undeniable. "All right," Greg growled, leaning forward on the table. "I'll admit my part, but don't think for a second I was the mastermind. This whole thing was her idea. Vivian wanted revenge. I just saw an opportunity." The detective remained impassive, taking notes. Greg's confession was significant, but it wasn't driven by remorse, only desperation to shift blame. Hours later, Elon and Jamie left the station. The cool night air outside was a stark contrast to the oppressive tension of the interrogation rooms. Elon stopped on the steps, gazing out at the flashing lights of the police cars still parked in front. "Will they go to prison?" Jamie asked, his voice soft. "Yes," Elon replied firmly. "The evidence is overwhelming. Vivian will face charges for attempted murder and conspiracy, and Greg too. They'll be held accountable." Jamie nodded, but didn't seem relieved. "It still hurts, doesn't it?" Elon turned to him, surprised by the boy's insight. "Yes," he admitted. "It hurts to know I was deceived. It hurts to know that someone I cared about could plan something so cruel. But it also reminds me that I need to be more careful. Trust is something precious." Jamie kicked at a small pebble on the sidewalk, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "Yeah, but you did the right thing. You stopped them." Elon placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "I didn't stop them, Jamie. We did. Without you, I wouldn't be standing here." For the first time that night, Jamie allowed himself a small smile. In the days that followed, news of the scandal spread rapidly. Headlines detailed the conspiracy, Elon Musk's near-death experience, and the roles Vivian and Greg played in the attempted poisoning. Jamie's courage became a focal point of the story, though he avoided the spotlight, preferring to stay by Elon's side as they began planning the next chapter of their lives. Hours later, Elon and Jamie left the police station. The cool night air felt like a relief after the tension inside. For a long time, neither of them spoke, the quiet between them thick with unspoken emotions. "Will they go to prison?" Jamie finally asked, his voice small. "Yes," Elon replied. "The evidence is solid. Vivian will be tried for attempted murder and conspiracy, and Greg too. They won't get out of this easily." Jamie nodded, but didn't seem comforted. "It still hurts, doesn't it?" Elon glanced at the boy, surprised by his insight. "Yes," he admitted. "It hurts to know I was deceived. It hurts to know someone I loved could plan something so cruel. But it also reminds me to be more careful. Trust is precious." Jamie kicked a small stone on the sidewalk. "Yeah, but you did the right thing. You stopped them." Elon looked down at Jamie, offering a small smile. "And you made that possible. Without you, I wouldn't even be here now." The following days were filled with headlines about Elon Musk's attempted poisoning and the conspiracy involving his wife and her accomplice. Jamie's bravery became a central part of the story, though he shied away from the spotlight. For Elon, however, this was only the beginning of a new chapter. Months later, the chaos surrounding Elon Musk's life had settled into a quiet resolve. The headlines had faded, the public moved on to other scandals, and the trials of Vivian and Greg were underway. Elon, however, remained focused not on the past, but on the future, one he was determined to make meaningful. On a crisp, sunny morning, Elon and Jamie stood outside a large, renovated building in downtown Los Angeles. Once a decaying warehouse, it now stood as a symbol of hope. The freshly painted sign above the entrance read, "Haven of Hope, a shelter for homeless youth." Jamie tilted his head, reading the sign aloud. "It's kind of cheesy," he muttered, though a grin tugged at the corners of his lips. "Cheesy works," Elon replied, his tone light but affectionate. "And it's exactly what we want to give them. Hope." Jamie chuckled, but couldn't hide his pride. He had never imagined that his life would lead to this, a partnership with one of the world's most famous men, helping others like himself. Many of the ideas for the shelter had been his, shaped by his own experiences living on the streets. "So," Jamie said, pretending to count on his fingers, "we've got dorms, a communal kitchen, study areas, and a gaming room?" "Really?" "Absolutely," Elon said with a playful smirk. "No one grows without work, but no one survives without play." The grand opening attracted a modest crowd of journalists and community members. As Elon stepped onto the small stage set up in front of the shelter, the audience fell silent. "When I built this mansion, I never imagined it would become the stage for one of the most painful betrayals of my life," he began, his voice calm but powerful. "But that betrayal taught me something important, that our greatest pain can also be the seed of our greatest purpose." He paused, scanning the crowd. His gaze landed on Jamie, who stood near the edge of the stage. Elon gestured for him to join him. "This young man," Elon continued as Jamie stepped up reluctantly, "showed me what courage really looks like. He saved my life in every way that matters. And he opened my eyes to a world I had ignored for too long." Jamie shifted awkwardly, his cheeks flushing as the crowd applauded. "This shelter," Elon said, placing a hand on Jamie's shoulder, "is just the beginning. It's a commitment to helping those who've been overlooked and underestimated. A promise to give others the chances they deserve." The applause grew louder, and Jamie couldn't help but smile. Later that afternoon, after the journalists had left and the shelter's first residents began moving in, Elon and Jamie sat together on a bench in the newly landscaped garden. Children ran around nearby, their laughter echoing in the air. "You think this will really make a difference?" Jamie asked, watching a young girl play with a toy she had found in the shelter's donation box. "I do," Elon replied, "because it's being done for the right reasons. Not for image, not for recognition, but because it's the right thing to do." Jamie nodded thoughtfully. "You gave me a second chance, you know." Elon turned to him, his expression serious. "And you earned it. Every part of it. You're braver than most adults I know, Jamie. And you've got a future ahead of you that's brighter than you realize." Jamie smiled faintly, his eyes fixed on the children. "You gave me a chance. Now we can give it to them." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jamie walked into the shelter to help a group of kids unpack their belongings. Elon stayed behind on the bench, watching as the lights inside the shelter began to glow warmly. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. The betrayal had left scars, but the boy who had stepped out of the shadows had helped him find a new purpose. Together, they had turned pain into something extraordinary. Final message: betrayals may come from those closest to us, but redemption and meaning can be found in the bonds we forge with others. When we turn our pain into purpose, we not only heal ourselves, we create hope for others.